This has been a bit of an interesting day so far because, first of all, I was in the middle of recording this video. I was about 20 or 25 minutes through when I got a random error message on my second monitor. I looked over there and it said something about you can't record here, there's an error, no permission, something like that. Long story short, my hard drive decided now is a awesome time to corrupt. So I lost hundreds of gigabytes of footage, including some projects that I was working on for YouTube videos, thumbnail bases, so like, you know, the thumbnails that I was using to, or rather the files I was using to create thumbnails for YouTube, essentially, as well as like champion artwork and all those sorts of things. So it's been pretty fun, and I am now finally back up and able to record here, so we're getting this video out. And then I'm also getting absolutely edged by this dungeon mission to earn 80 Immortal Soul Essence from the Iron Twins Fortress, and I'm at 79 out of 80, so that's also pretty cool. But that being said, we're doing something cool here today. We are doing a mythical tier list. Every single mythical champion inside the entire game of Raid Shadow Legends is going to be ranked on this tier list, and I only own 3 mythicals. I also forgot to turn my light on, so there we go. I'll look a little bit more beautiful now. There we are. So every single mythical is pulled up here. We'll be ranking them. I'll be going through it. I only own 3 of them. I'll be talking about the 3 that I own as we get to them and how they've impacted my account and whatnot. And then for the rest of them, essentially, it's going to be just kind of based on other people's experiences as well as, you know, statistics. So, for example, like their multipliers in the case of damage dealers and those sorts of things. So let's go ahead. Let's hop straight into it here. The first mythical champion we're going to be talking about is Androc. Androc is actually pretty fantastic, and it all comes down to his A3, where he has an increased resistance to strengthen and a continuous heal, plus an extra continuous heal if they have less than 50% HP. His passive also means that critical hits inflicted by allies fill the turn meter of all allies by 5%. There's no cooldown on this, so if you look at, like, say for a Newt or something like that in Chimera primarily, there can be like a 15% turn meter fill on his A1 as well as his A3. Same thing with Marius on the A2, as he's getting the 15% turn meter fill for everybody on your team. Plus, with this continuous heal, if you pair them with a Senna, that's how you get essentially the world record team that we have currently inside the game. So he is a fantastic support champion, and because of that, I think it's fair to rank him inside the A tier. Now, for the astute observers amongst you, you'll notice that the S tier is actually instead replaced by Galathir as the name at the top there. So it's not S, it's Galathir, and to save you the time, Galathir is going into that tier. Galathir is so good that I am confident naming an entire tier list, or an entire tier of the tier list, after him based on, you know, the highest ranking champions in the tier list, right? He is so ridiculously broken. He is basically Duchess, but on steroids in every single way. So he's got revives, he's got perfect veils, he's got strips, stuns, I believe, as well as like block active skills or something crazy like that on his alternative form. He also doesn't trigger counterattacks, so he can't really be countered by Marichka or Taurus. If you don't know much about Galathir, I would highly recommend that you check him out inside the champion, what is this even called? The champion index, there we go. Because not many people are going to have him, surprisingly enough. He has a decent amount of reviews, of course, right? He's probably one of the most reviewed mythical champions inside the game. But when you compare that to like an Arbiter that has now 900 reviews, right? She has literally 3 times more reviews than him. So I'd actually be interested to see like what the rates are of like players that have a mythical now, especially considering that we have Lady Mikage as like a guaranteed as well. Next up, we have Siegfrund, the Nephilim, who is a absolutely fantastic champion. This guy was probably one of the most underwhelming mythicals when he was initially introduced into the game, and really the only thing against him now is that you can't metamorph into his secondary form on command. It's basically predicated by everybody else on your team dying, which is a bit of a shame, but his A3 is like one of the hardest hitting skills in the entire game. It's basically Sun Wukong's A2, but again on steroids, because this guy's base stats are just cranked to the moon. And this, I believe, was responsible for like a 4-second world record team inside the event dungeon the last time it was here. So this guy is absolutely insane. Excuse me there. Without question, he is also going to be going into the Galathir, or the S tier. You know, there's not really much more to be said about it. On his primary form, he has insane damage. On his secondary form, he has an AoE revive with a block damage, as well as a cleanse, and then a heal and a block debuffs. This guy is so incredibly strong. And then, you know, decreases damage taken from skills by 20% too. This guy is absolutely insane. We're moving over to the Barbarians, and we have Alaz. Alaz is a very, very strong champion in my opinion. I don't have him, sadly. He has an A3, though, where he places a provoke on a targeted enemy for 2 turns. This can't be resisted if they have less than 50% HP. Very strong skill. Also an AoE counterattack on all of your team, as well as a block damage on all allies for 1 turn as well. This is so incredible. He can essentially just keep the Hydra head provoked without issue, as well as obviously targeting specific enemies inside arena or something like that, right? So say a Duchess is about to get off her revive. Well, if she has less than 50% HP, he says, nope, you're now provoked. You're doing an A1. Too bad. How sad. He also has an absolute smack on the A2 and a fairly decently hard hitting A1 as well. So this guy is incredibly strong. His alternative form is a little bit more around like support, as well as like, you know, HP burns and those sorts of things. He does instantly activate HP burns on enemies under stone skin, which is okay. It's not incredibly useful though, because those burns aren't going to do a whole lot of damage. That being said though, Alaz does find his way comfortably into the A tier as well, along with Androc. This tier list is going to be very top heavy. So I've noticed when I've done tier lists before for like legendaries, epics, and rare champions specifically, generally you'll have like 1 or 2 up here, and then the rest are kind of like all through these tiers. It's very much the opposite for Mythical. Shocker, right? The hardest champions to get inside the game are going to be some of the best champions. So who would have thought? We have Gizmak the Terrible. This guy is, in fact, terrible to go against. Fantastic if you have him. He's placing a burn that can't be resisted if his crit rate is 100%. Doesn't matter about affinity because he's just placing it, right? Also has a 50% chance of placing the burn on all enemies for 1 turn. On each of his turns, again, it can't be resisted. Then he can come in with his secondary form and absolutely slam everybody with Kaboom. And this guy absolutely smacks. I try to run like Taurus Marichka against him all the time because of the burn, getting the automatic black damage. But he essentially just doesn't care about that and then just goes ahead and nukes you down anyways. Plus, he's getting an extra turn if he kills somebody. Based on his utility as well as his multipliers and all those sorts of things, Gizmak is getting an easy S tier without really questioning. He's one of the best mythicals in the entire game, in my opinion. And he has a unique kind of kit where you can get good use out of him both inside the arena as well as inside, you know, PvE content, which makes him very special. We have Lazarius. Everybody was kind of excited about the damage dealing capabilities of Lazarius when he came out, but I think people are a little bit changing their opinions, right? Because he's a weird champion. He has 115 base speed. He has almost 1300 defense, and then he has like 1233 on the attack. But he's kind of like a mini Lysandra, or a stronger Lysandra really, and a mini Arbiter kind of all in one. It's weird. He has a fill the turn meter of all allies by 20%, decreasing the turn meter of all enemies by 20%. Then also an increased attack and a strengthen on everybody, which is so incredibly strong, right? Setting up himself for damage, setting up your other damage dealers. He is so, so good. And shocker, Lazarius is also going to find his way into the S tier because he also has one of the strongest speed in all battles auras in the entire game. And since it's all battles, it's going to work for, you know, obviously City of Centranos, but more importantly, Siege, so that you can get yourself those good feral pieces as well when it comes around. His alternative form is very good for like doing damage and everything like that too. So this guy is incredibly strong. And as you can see, people like him pretty much everywhere. He has a lot of utility everywhere inside the game, which is quite nice. We have Skinwalkers next. We have Gallas, Bloodcrest, who is a very, very cool looking champion. He's kind of like this, you know, really macho chicken on his Form 1, and then on Form 2, he's like the electro macho chicken. Pretty cool, pretty cool. That being said, don't worry, this is not a mythical that's going to end up inside the S tier by any means. He's essentially supposed to be a damage dealer, but he doesn't do a whole lot of damage, so because of that, he's going to be ranked a little bit lower than he probably deserves to be. He's going to be inside the B tier. I definitely think you're going to use this guy if you have him on your account, but as far as mythicals go, he's just not that good. There's going to be legendaries that do his job essentially, but better. That being said, though, if you disagree with any of these, obviously, certainly let me know down in the comments, of course. I'd love to hear about it and, you know, where you use them and all those sorts of good things. So let's go ahead and let's go on to the next champion. This is Mezomel, Looperfang, who is probably one of the coolest looking mythicals in my opinion. As you can see, people aren't too high on her. She does bring a block revive on the Form 1 though, which is very nice because obviously against champions like Sun Wukong, she's going to make sure that they stay down. and it just adds a little bit of extra terrifyingness to her particular kit. And then we have an A2 that looks pretty cool as well, where she just does a bunch of damage. So what is she going to be rated? Well, there's actually going to be a lot of people disagreeing with this, I'm sure. She's actually going to go ahead and be in the S tier as well. And I'm sure people are getting ready to comment. Sorry if I hit the mic there. Let me get my pop filter back across here. There's going to be people leaving comments saying, she doesn't deserve to be an S tier, blah, blah, blah. I'm putting there by my own personal choice. I think that she looks absolutely badass. One of my favorite champions for quite some time was also a skinwalker in the way of Fane. She was one of my most wanted champions way back in the day before I actually got her. Now I have her, like, you know, awakened and empowered and all those sorts of things, and I use her daily still on my clan boss team. But I find these skinwalkers, some of them look just so absolutely cool, like Frenzy the Cackler, for example, very fantastic looking champion. Basher is a very cool champion. We have Bauf now, the Rancid, who's like a battle skunk. It doesn't get much cooler than this faction, in my opinion, and Mezomel is certainly no exception to that. So for aesthetic alone, she's one of my most wanted champions, but I would also definitely use her inside the arena and places like that. So that's why she's going into S tier. For the regular player, and for somebody who's not incredibly biased, she's probably going more so into like C or B tier, I would say, on a realistic account. That being said, though, if she's your only mythical, you're still going to use her. It doesn't really matter. Next up, we have Ashnar. Ashnar is actually somebody that I had to look through their kit a little bit before doing this video, because I don't know anything about him. Nobody talks about him. Nobody's using him. He has pretty mediocre reviews, like, everywhere. As you can see, probably one of the lowest rated champions in the entire game, let alone lowest rated mythical champions in the entire game. And we just had the ratings reset not too long ago, so for them to be this bad is pretty crazy. He places a weaken, HP burn, also places an HP burn on all allies. This debuff cannot be resisted or blocked, but then he also has an HP burn placed by this champion, increases your max HP. HP burn debuffs placed on allies heal them instead of damaging them. So he's placing like HP burns on allies, whereas it could just be straight up like, hey, here's a continuous heal. Like, this is so trash, because an HP burn does, what is it, 4% max HP? So you're healing your allies for 4%. You could literally say, here's like 2 7.5% continuous heals, and that's already a better skill, apart from the fact that you're doing an AoE burn. But there's epic champions that do AoE burns on a 3-turn cooldown, people. Like, it is crazy. He does have an activate HP burns on all enemies and all allies, which is pretty cool. Decreasing resistance. It's okay, I guess. Even his secondary form isn't really anything to talk about. Like, he's just so disappointing. Where is he going to be ranked? Well, that is a great question. Ashnar is going to go ahead and go into the C tier. I couldn't bring myself to rank him any higher than that. I don't think he deserves it. We then have Gharol, Blood Maul, who is a fantastic looking champion. As you can see, people are pretty high on her as well. She's one of the most annoying champions to go against in the arena because of her A2 form. Attacks all enemies, has a 20% chance of repeating the attack. So you might be thinking, oh, 20% chance to repeat the attack. That's pretty cool. What's really insane about this is that it stacks. So she has an AoE with a 20% chance to repeat it, and that repeated attack has a 20% chance of repeating itself, and so on. So if you get like exceptionally lucky, she can attack with an AoE A1 that has a strong multiplier like 3, 4, 5 times in a row. I think when I had my Marichka in Stone Skin, I seen her go like 4 times into the Marichka, and it almost took the Stone Skin off of her before she even got a turn. Absolutely insane. Obviously, if you run her with like some sort of a blender comp or ally attack or something like that, it's so strong. Plus, whenever an ally attack, this champion has a 25% chance to team up and join them on their attack on the A1 that has a chance of then being repeated on that attack. This is absolutely insane. And then very similar to like a Leorius, her damage increases as the champion's HP decreases. So if she loses HP, she's going to do more damage, which is absolutely insane. She is such a strong damage dealer. And because of that, I did actually go ahead and place her into the B tier. And the reason for that is to get into A tier, you need to have a little bit more than just damage. She's very useful, obviously, for Hydra, but she's definitely been significantly power crept since the Hydra rework. So you're really just going to see her inside the arena these days, but at high-end arenas, there's very efficient ways to counter her. A good example of which would be like a Mortu Macabre or something like that, right? So at a very base level, certainly. So she has been power crept recently. Not much you can do about that, but I do want to say, even though she's in B tier, she is an absolutely incredible champion, certainly. We have Komidus Dark Smile, who is kind of like a little imp elf type thing here, who has very good reviews, as you can see. What does he do? Well, he has a steal 100% of the target's turn meter and put their skills on cooldown, which is insane. Places a block active skills after a strip is also insane. I'm going to take a drink. Steals 20% of the turn meter from each enemy under a block active skills. Damage based on HP, by the way. Secondary form. He has an AoE weaken, healing himself by 50% of his max HP and an extra turn into the bombs, which instantly detonate on Stone Skin or enemy whose HP is less than this champion's HP. Let me tell you what this means. Stone Skin goes on your champions to try and make them survive. This guy just comes in, says, hey, you're getting bombs, and they are going off immediately. So against somebody even like a Marichka, as long as you can put a block buffs on her or something like that, this guy is so strong. And because of that, I did actually go ahead and rank him inside S tier. This guy is so strong. You can get use out of him inside PvP, PvE, basically everywhere inside the game. If you need damage and you can bomb the enemy, Komidus is going to be a very solid way to go. We have Karnage, the free champion that everybody's going to get. Very, very strong damage dealer. I'm starting to see him pop up more inside the arena, certainly the live arena. As you can see, people are quite high on him in most areas as well. Not really Iron Twins or Sand Devils, obviously, as you'd expect, but he's got some unique stuff as well in the way of the seal debuffs, which is pretty cool. Definitely take a look through his kit if you're not familiar with him and farm the city of Centranos more than I have been, because I've certainly been falling behind, unfortunately. Very strong base stats for a damage dealer too. Base form of 1476 on the attack, almost 20,000 HP, 100 speed, so incredibly strong. And then 1960 base attack, almost 2,000 base attack on his alternative form for an attack-based damage-dealing champion. This is obscene. Where do we rank him? Well, he is going to go ahead and slot perfectly into the A tier. I think everybody's going to be happy with him when they get him. And I think that's just where he fits. I don't think he's quite S tier because the champions that are in there certainly do things a little bit better, but he definitely deserves to be talked about. We have the Calamitus. Interesting champion. AoE, attack is always critical. It's whatever. The rest of his kit isn't always critical, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's no synergy here, right? Because the AoE, say for example, if he had just flatline a passive that said, hey, I have a 50% chance extra of inflicting a critical hit. It's like, okay, cool, I can work with that. I only need to build him with 50% crit rate. Hell, make it 70, right? Make it a 30% chance at base extra to crit. Make his base crit rate 30%, right? Then he's quite a bit stronger. Making one skill in a kit that has like 5 active skills, 6 active skills technically, and only one of them has an increased chance to crit, that is just ridiculously stupid. That's like 2018 Raid Shadow Legends. What are we doing here, people? He doesn't really bring anything else to the kit that, you know, epic champions don't for the most part. Because of that, I don't think we need to talk about him a whole lot. He's going into the F tier, no questions about it. On to the next champion. There's obviously use cases for all these champions. At the end of the day, they're mythical champions. You can use them in content and whatnot, and they'll still get the job done because they are the highest rarity of champions and are going to have ridiculous base stats. But we are doing this tier list as if, you know, mythical champions are the only ones that we have access to, essentially. And as far as mythicals go, he is probably one of the worst. It would be very nice to see him get a buff, certainly, because I do think he deserves it. We have Aphidus, who is actually one of the champions that I do have. He has an AoE burn, and it detonates a burn if they're under one already. He has an AoE increased attack on everybody, ignoring 25% of their defense if they're not under a burn, ignoring 50% if they're under a burn, then increases duration of all enemy debuffs by 1 turn. Pretty cool. He has godlike multipliers on all his skills, rather, according to the Hell Hades website. No, I can't get him to hit. I cannot get him to hit. Even inside Hydra, my Sun Wukong's A3 hits harder than Aphidus, and he has very strong base stats as well. I just cannot get this guy to hit. The one thing that's cool, A1, places a decreased defense for 2 turns, also places Perfect Veil on this champion for 1 turn, so he's essentially protecting himself, which is pretty cool. He has an alternative form which does not synergize whatsoever with his primary form, because it's then placing Provoke on all enemies for 1 turn, as well as a strengthen and increased defense, and then also a stun on everybody, and then places 2 continuous heals on all allies. Like, what is this guy doing? His Form 1 is based on damage and burns, and his Form 2 is just, I'm mid-tank now. Why? Why? He does have a passive that there's a chance of placing a weaken. He's also increasing his defense by 1 for every 2 points of attack when in their alternate form. This might sound decent, but it's really not, because let's say you have 7,000 attack on your primary form. You're only getting 3,500 defense from that, which is not much in terms of defensive damage scaling. Super disappointed. I pulled this guy off camera, and when I pulled the mythical, I was like, oh boy, who could it be? Is it going to be Mezomel? Is it going to be Siegfrund or Galathir? And then he came out, and I was like, oh. It was so disappointing. Where did I rank him? Well, out of respect for him and what he has done to my account, there is no way in hell that I can rank him below Calamitus, so I put him into C tier. Bottom of C tier, though. You could very much argue that he's still in F tier. He did get a rebalance, but even after that rebalance, he's still not that good in my opinion. Let me know down below if you think I'm crazy. We have Embrys, the Anomaly, who is a pretty cool looking champion. This is the champion that everybody's going to get by participating in the Chimera. I'm pretty much about halfway there currently. Nobody seems to have him yet. Obviously, Chimera hasn't been in the game long enough. Alternative form looks absolutely insane. This guy can also place some debuffs that's going to cause block revive, which is very strong. Fantastic looking champion as well. Now, off of his kit, he looks like he's going to be like an A or an S tier champion. However, he's not even released into the game yet. Technically, he's there. You know, we can see his stats and all that sort of stuff, but nobody has him. Nobody's played with him. He could play incredibly different than what we were expecting, right? There's certain champions that they look like trash on paper, but they're actually fantastic, or certain champions that look amazing on paper, but then they're actually trash, like Aphidus, for example. So he's going into B tier because I think that's the most fair to him, considering that we can't really make a determination at this point where he's going to lie. That being said, if I make a tier list later in 2025, I would be very curious to see where he's sitting on it at that point. Next up, we have Krixia, which is, of course, one of the mythical champions that I have, and she's the second last champion that I have as well, so I only have one other mythical besides her, of course. Krixia is insane. She has an increased cooldown, so basically a warlord skill. She then has a decreased resistance, block buffs, and a turn meter decrease. She also has an A1 where each hit has a 50% chance of increasing the duration of all debuffs on the target by 1 turn. Then she also uses accuracy basically as resistance. So you build her with 700 resistance, she's going to have 350 accuracy off the hop, and she's immune to stun debuffs. So she's a perfect counter for somebody like an Armand's, right? You don't need to worry about her getting stunned. She has high enough resistance, she can easily resist the turn meter steal. And not only that, you bring her over to her second form, she has a skill cooldown decrease by 3 turns, so she's got a pseudo reset. It's not quite as strong as like a Prince Kaimar, because he guarantees that even if it's like a 7-turn cooldown, it's going to be reset. But not only that, she's also bringing a remove all debuffs on this skill. Not only that, she's got an AoE and a block debuffs for 2 turns, and an increased resistance for 2 turns, and a turn meter fill by 20%. And not only that, her A1, each hit has a 60% chance of decreasing the duration of all debuffs on a random ally by 1 turn. So if your ally has a stun, sleep, provoke, true fear, fear, petrification, decreased defense, decreased speed, weaken bombs, any of that, it just has a chance of having its duration decrease. She is so incredibly strong, and I don't even have to debate where I put her. She's straight into S tier. If you get her, you are going to use her. There have been stronger champions released, sure, but she is still the strongest of the strong mythical champions. She is so good. And what makes her particularly cool, of course, is since she's a mythical, if she gets locked out by like a warlord or a Yumiko or champions like that on her primary form, she can then switch over to her secondary form and reset everybody, right? It's so strong, and she's so welcome on my account. We have Frolni, the Mechanist, an interesting looking little dwarf that is pretty mediocre in every sense of the word. AoE, based off HP, he doesn't really do much. He's basically there to try and help keep your team alive, but there are champions that just do it so much better. He's got like a little bit of an ability to prolong fights, inside like the arena or those sorts of things. But again, if you're just looking for survivability, there's way better options out there. And because of that, we are actually going to be going ahead and ranking him in the B tier. He's a very mediocre mythical in my particular opinion. You'll use him if you pull him, but you're not going to go out of your way to pull him, I don't think. We have Toshiro the Bloody, who is probably one of the coolest looking champions in the entire game, even on his base form, but on his secondary form, where he transforms into this really cool looking like flame fire or flame blood based samurai. This guy is also one of the best damage dealers in the entire game for both Hydra as well as Chimera. So the PvP elements of clans versus clans, he is so incredibly strong. You pair him with the next champion on our list, and he's just going to do very, very good things for your account. So this guy, borderline broken with how much damage he can do. He is obscene. Toshiro, without question, goes into the S tier. I don't really have to say much more about it than that. Lady Mikage, the fact alone that she is a permanent fusion could get her into S tier because she's a mythical that everybody's going to be able to get. But not only that, she has an ally attack, an AoE ally attack, including herself. He has a debuff decrease on your team, debuff increase on the enemy team, buff increase on your team, and buff decrease on the enemy team. So she's taking all buffs and all debuffs on your team and the enemy team, and she is manipulating them appropriately, which is insane. And then she also removes all debuffs from the ally with the highest attack at the start of her turn. I use her with Thor inside Hydra. He has the highest attack, so every single turn she goes, she's cleansing my Thor completely, which means that I don't need to worry about like the fears that get landed on him, decrease attacks, nothing like that. She is so incredibly strong. She also has a passive that decreases the turn meter of the enemy with the highest attack by 15%. In her alternate form, she has an AoE stun, an AoE strip, increase accuracy, and weaken. She is so incredibly strong. All those things put together, she is an easy S tier. My god, this tier list is top heavy, but holy moly, do we have a lot of good mythical champions inside the game right now. Finally, we're here. We're at the last faction. We have Nice, who is probably one of my most annoying champions to go against because he does counter a lot of the teams I pick inside the live arena. He's got a block revive on his A3, which is a one-time hitter, so he can be countered by like UDK or something like that. But he also can't be killed. He just revives into the secondary form with like a counter attack. This secondary form is also going to increase his HP, defense, speed, resistance, and accuracy by 15% for each dead enemy and ally, stacking up to 100%. Also revives one random ally with 50% turn meter and HP every time this champion kills an enemy, and he can smack on his secondary form, so he does good things. That being said, though, at the end of the day, he is just a damage dealer, so even with all that utility, I can only put him at A tier. He's not really bringing additional like control or anything like that, apart from like a one-turn provoke. However, you know, there's other champions that do that just as well, right? We have Arbais, who is probably one of my most wanted mythicals currently. She has an ally speed in all battles by 25%. It's tied with Lazarius, and I believe this is the highest speed aura inside the entire game for an all battles aura. She's so incredibly strong. AoE A1 with a 40% chance of placing in block active skills. This is ridiculous, people. A2 removes all buffs from all enemies, increase the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn, then place a revive on death on all allies for 2 turns. Come on. It's insane. It's insane. Fills the turn meter of all allies by 30% and place an increased attack and increased accuracy on everybody for 2 turns. You're not stripping people with your Sun Wukong's A3. Problem resolved. Bring in Arbais, the Stone Thorn, and she's going to resolve that. We then have Stone Thorn's Embrace. 30% chance of placing a petrification on an attacker for 1 turn whenever an ally is attacked while under a revive on death. So she's got like a pseudo Mithrala in there as well, and that's not even mentioning her secondary form, which you should go and look at some point if you're not familiar with our base. Because of all that, she's also an S tier champion, in my opinion. She brings a lot to your team, and she's certainly going to be used if you do end up pulling her. Finally, we have Nell Blackteeth, who is interesting. She was part of the Easter events, essentially. She was introduced kind of when we had Eostrid and those sorts, or sorry, Hansel and Gretel, not Eostrid, so a little bit after. Very, very interesting champion. So she has an AoE, decreased defense, and weaken. That's cool. At this point, everybody has Lydia that's going to do the same thing. Fills the turn meters of all allies by 20%. Yeah, that's It's kind of cool, I guess. Steals all buffs from all enemies, decrease each target's turn meter by 10%. That's also kind of cool. Instantly activate all poisons, which is interesting because she doesn't even place a poison, apart from her passive, which whenever they receive a buff, is healed or has their turn meter increased, place a 5% poison. Kind of questionable, because you don't see her in the arena. In this particular skill, you'd think that's where that would be incredibly useful, but look at her arena rating. It's absolutely terrible, right? Like, people aren't using her there. Her alternative form isn't even that good. She has an AoE True Fear. Debuff cannot be resisted or blocked. She looks like incredibly cool, don't get me wrong. And then, you know, 100% more damage to enemies under crowd control. Just disappointing. Overall, just disappointing is the way to say it. Because of that, she's going into the B tier at best, I think. Because the chance of, you know, activating all those poisons is kind of still good. If you can get somebody else, like even a Taurus, at the epic level to place those poisons, she can still be very useful. This is the finalized tier list. Again, it's quite top heavy. We have a lot in S tier, a few in A, more in B, and then C and F. It feels bad to be, you know, the one mythical champion inside the F tier, I'm sure. But hey, it is what it is. Calamitus, you should be looking for a balance patch at this point, because he definitely needs it. People, that being said, I would love to hear from you guys what you disagree with and where you think these champions should be ranked instead. If you do disagree with them, as always, thank you guys all so much for the support on the channel. I'll see you next time.